The following program is a production of WMFE, Orlando, Melbourne, Daytona Beach.
I'm Janet Sawyer. Now on This Week, your local news program from WMFE. Those lining up for jobs in Central Florida likely will have a long wait ahead of them. Hear expert analysis on whether the local economy is structured to survive through these tough times. Plus,
we've been following reports today that a bag of toys.
It's a story that has dominated the airwaves for months. Why critics say the Kaylee Anthony case reveals racist undertones in the media. Then, Endeavour is in orbit this week, but few future space shuttle missions remain. What could this mean for the Kennedy Space Center? That's This Week on WMFE.
Support for This Week is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to WMFE from viewers like you. Thank you.
Reporting this week, Pat Duggins, Brittany Shane, and Lisa Phillips.
Florida's unemployment rate is climbing and will reach 9% next year. That's according to a local economist who says many more job losses will come from Central Florida's bread and butter service industries. Hard economic times like these are a stark reminder of Central Florida's continuing struggle to create jobs outside of hotels, restaurants, and retail.
This traffic tie-up on Orlando's Colonial Drive is a sign of the times. Central Florida's unemployed are flocking to job fairs like this one held last week at the Central Florida Fairgrounds. Nearly 8,000 people showed up, all in hopes of finding work.
I've been job searching ever since I graduated from college, so it's been about 6 months now, and I'm not having much luck.
And Lauren Polinsky is just one of over 74,000 job seekers currently unemployed across Central Florida. That's up 27,000 from last year. But that's not stopping Lauren. She's leaving no stone unturned in her search for a career in communications. She's looked online, in newspapers, and now she's here at the job fair. Different methods, but all with the same frustrating result.
Well, the places that I talked to seemed exactly what I thought they were going to be. The jobs were mostly sales positions, or they were service industry jobs.
In fact, over half the jobs offered at the fair were in the service industry, which isn't surprising since tourism has long been the backbone of Central Florida's economy. All told, it accounts for nearly 399,000 jobs in the Tri-County area, almost a quarter of the workforce. And so far, it's been relatively insulated from job losses racking up in other sectors. Construction has been hit hardest, shedding 6,700 positions in the past year. But according to economist Sean Snaith, that may change as the economy worsens and tourism begins to falter.
Tourism and leisure had been one of the cylinders of the economy that was still firing here in Central Florida. The weakness of the dollar had led to a lot of international tourism, Europe, UK, Canada. A lot of people are down here spending money, and so tourism was still producing jobs and helping the economy move forward, even when the housing bust was really at its peak. That, unfortunately, is starting to fade.
It seems a global economic downturn is catching up with Central Florida. Hotel occupancy, a key indicator of tourist activity, is down, and even Disney is taking a hit. They've seen profits fall by $117 million in just the last quarter. Not to mention retail sales showing a year-to-year decline of 6% in Metro Orlando. That means people are spending $6 billion less than last year. And according to Snaith, it's only going to get worse.
I expect times are going to continue to get more difficult. Domestically, of course, we're in recession, unemployment's rising. Vacations, these kind of things are low-hanging fruit when families have to start trimming budgets.
The void created by missing tourist dollars could be toxic for Central Florida, which is heavily dependent on visitors and their cash. For instance, take Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a similar size to Orlando. While they're not immune to the current downturn, their top industries are manufacturing and healthcare, which gives their economy a better chance as families tighten their belts. And as job seekers like Polinsky are finding, the choice of jobs in Central Florida is much more narrow.
I've been looking for anything from marketing, public relations, journalism, communications. Those are the fields that I have degrees in and have my experience in. I've been finding mostly service industry jobs, retail jobs right now, I guess, for the holidays, but even those are far and few between.
According to Snaith, over-relying on one industry makes economies vulnerable. He says it's important for Central Florida to diversify beyond the current top industries of accommodation, food services, and retail.
If we are concentrated in one or two particular sectors, if those sectors start to falter, then the whole economy goes with that. But if we can diversify the jobs base across different sectors, some sectors will perform well at times, some sectors will underperform at times, but there'll be some balance.
This isn't the first time leaders in Central Florida have had to face the harsh reality that while tourism is a cash cow when times are good, it hurts to have an economy depending on it when times are bad.
In the wake of 9/11, what happened to tourism here in Central Florida sent a pretty sharp wake-up call to leaders in the region that there is a need to diversify our economy.
Since then, Snaith points to growth in the healthcare industry, like the medical city under construction at Lake Nona in Orlando. But the promised jobs there won't be available for years. Modeling and simulation is another success for the region. But creating job growth in that area and others will be difficult over the next couple of years, as new companies struggle to finance their businesses. Major sources of cash are already drying up. Not only is a lending crisis putting a freeze on credit, but investment from venture capital is also down statewide, a fall of 65% from the first quarter. The bottom line, even if the economy does manage to diversify, it won't happen anytime soon.
Well, I mean, when it comes to economic development and diversifying economy, there's no magic wand that you can wave and instantly your economy is diversified.
All of which is bad news for job seekers like Polinsky, who simply can't afford to wait for the right job to come along.
I don't know how much longer I'll be able to stay in Florida looking for a job when there doesn't seem to be any. I'm going to have to think about moving soon.
To talk more about the makeup of the local economy, Stan Geber joins us now. He's a consultant for Orlando-based Fishkind & Associates. Thanks for coming.
Sure, Lisa. Good to be here.
Central Florida's economy has been service-based for a long time, but there has been effort to change that. So what is some of the progress that's been made?
Well, we've had a lot of progress in Innovation Way down by the airport, certainly around the UCF area, and also the improvement in some of the new highway construction, the Beltway, the second Beltway around Orlando metro area. All those things have really positioned Central Florida economy to become a more diverse economy in the future.
Okay, and diversification helps the region ride out recession in terms of jobs and tax revenue. Has the region done enough in the good times to prepare us for now?
Sure. We've done very well. The economy really is fairly diverse. I think people tend to look at the attractions and hotel and retail as the major segment, and that's because it is a very large segment. But the other components of the economy are also very large. There's over 250,000 people, for example, in manufacturing and construction and high tech and information. So those are fairly big numbers.
And then in our story, we talk about Charlotte, North Carolina, and how do we compare to different regions of the nation? Are we better or worse than other regions?
Well, of course, the Research Triangle has a lot of opportunity and a lot of infrastructure with all of the universities that they've got in that location. But this area is also very strong in a number of areas, and it's a growing economy. So we've got, in particular, the Innovation Way area, which is kind of anchored by Orlando Airport and Research Park 2. The UCF Med School and Burnham Institute, all of those components coming together to create a new employment center in Central Florida is really a terrific opportunity. And there's a couple of other areas like that in the economy. For example, Seminole Way is kind of an emerging concept where we anchor Seminole County between UCF and Lake Mary, and then all along that Highway 417 corridor we have the regional mall, we have an airport, we have thousands of acres of vacant industrial land. So there's a lot of opportunity to create some synergies between the high-tech employment base in Lake Mary, the university, and the airport at Sanford. And so those are some good opportunities for the community as well.
And then are there any industries that are recession-proof?
No.
Okay.
In a word, no. I think certainly in this economy, Central Florida and Florida in general is hurt a little bit worse than the rest of the country, in part because we're construction-oriented and we're growth-oriented and we're finance-oriented. We don't have a lot of manufacturing, but construction and finance have been the areas that have been hurt worst in this recession. So it's going to take a little bit longer for us to come out of the recession. We're not going to do as well as the rest of the country, at least through 2009. It's going to take until 2010 for this area to come back a little bit.
Stan Gebber from Fishkind & Associates, thank you for coming.
Thanks, Lisa.
The media frenzy surrounding missing toddler Kaylee Anthony is showing no signs of slowing down here in Orlando or across the country. But the case is revealing stark differences in the way similar stories are treated in the media, and some would also say in our society as a whole.
But first at 6, big developments in the case against Casey Anthony.
It's a story that has dominated the airwaves for months.
We've been following reports today that a bag of toys and possibly bones was found during a search for missing Florida toddler Kaylee Anthony,
and captured the attention of Central Floridians.
I've been following it since the very beginning. I think it just pulls at your heart.
The community is so involved. This little girl has become everyone's child or grandchild, and I think we just all want closure to it.
Kaylee Anthony has become a household name since she went missing back in July. The Orlando Tot has even made national headlines, turning up nightly on news programs. And Kaylee's now infamous smile is plastered across magazine covers. The media frenzy surrounding this case has hooked the public and rocked our community.
It's a circus, it's the little girl, it's the intensity of it. It's a very intense thing. It's like the most dramatic movie you could ever see on television. It's like Gone with the Wind. You just get riveted to it.
William Murtaugh has followed this case from the beginning, even creating a website with daily updates. He says you can't help but get sucked into this case thanks to the endless coverage.
And it's like an addiction we all have, and the media feeds it. And I feed my own addiction because I'm a media of a sort.
But the attention Kaylee's been getting locally and nationally has some asking questions about whether there's a media bias that favors a certain type of victim.
Now to the search for Kaylee.
Critics call it missing white woman syndrome.
The victims that get the most attention, especially on cable television programming, are young, white, female, members of middle class or upper middle class. There is this fascination with them as victims that allows irresponsible television programmers to generate weeks and weeks and months of programming around them.
Dr. Roy Peter Clark is with the Poynter Institute, a think tank for journalists in St. Petersburg. He thinks the problem is out of hand.
It's so obvious that there's an inordinate attention to certain kind of victims in our society, and a sad lack of attention to other kinds of victims, that it's a problem that I think the whole society and culture needs to address.
Kaylee Anthony is just the latest headliner to fit this mold. Clark points to cases like Natalie Holloway, Lacey Peterson, and Jean-Benet Ramsey that were all at one time must-see TV, and all with one major similarity.
I would just ask people to think about the last time a child or a young woman of color received anywhere near the kind of coverage that any of these typical victims has received.
Thanks to the excess of coverage given over to cases like Kaylee's, you'd be forgiven for thinking Black or Latino children never go missing. But that's not the case. According to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, there are 334 people reported missing in Florida, and over 150 of them are minorities. Blogger William Murtaugh thinks this blind spot to other races is a deep-rooted problem.
As a culture, for some reason, black kid goes missing, another kid. You know, single mother's probably out partying or something, the kid wandered off, coke baby, racism.
You probably won't know who this is, but her name is Zenyatta Ray. She's a 3-year-old African-American girl from Tampa. She disappeared in August, about 2 months after Kaylee. She hasn't been found yet either, and also is believed to be taken by her mother. Yet her case hasn't received any media coverage.
I'm not saying that the show producers are consciously ignoring the plight of African American children or Hispanic children. But what I am saying is that they belong to a culture in which the pretty white girl gets most of the attention.
Even Leonard Padilla, who's been closely involved with the Caylee Anthony case, agrees racism plays a part in who gets on the news and who doesn't. But he argues that Caylee's case is unique.
The American public hasn't paid that kind of attention to kids other than little white kids, cute, 3 years old. I mean, kids go missing all the time, but she's also very special because of the way that the pictures came out originally, and it just caught hold, and America don't want to let go.
All these things add together, build it up. It's like a made-for-TV movie. I don't think you could make this stuff up, and this is what keeps us drawn to this. There's always something there.
Though it's precisely the fact that Caylee's story has been turned into a soap opera by the media that worries critics like Clark.
What about black girls? What about brown girls? What about little boys? What about missing adults? What about people of lower economic classes who don't have the resources to keep their image in front of the public? There is nothing better or special about these victims that we are focusing on now. We can find many more, and I would argue that they are being ignored in favor of a kind of a soap opera narrative.
But with stations fighting each other for ratings in the competitive sweep season, it looks like the soap opera won't be coming to an end anytime soon.
It's the question everyone's asking.
They know there's people out there that are interested in Caylee, and they're going to tune into this show to watch that. Nielsen's going to come in, bump their ratings, they're going to raise their advertising rates. So that's where money comes in.
But for critics like Clark, whatever the reason behind the chase for ratings and the overemphasis on some stories at the expense of others, he thinks it's a sad reflection on the state of the media.
There is a natural curiosity about undisclosed secrets. We want to know guilty or not guilty. We want to know what happened to that poor child. We want to know, will the killer or kidnapper ever be brought to justice? And so that natural tendency, I believe, is being exploited for the crassest reasons. People interested in ratings have manipulated these baser instincts for their own benefit.
WFTV Channel 9 News Director Bob Jordan declined an interview with us, but did say that the story isn't over and his station will continue to cover it. Other local commercial news stations did not respond to our requests for interviews. Now we want to know what you think about local media coverage of the Caylee Anthony case. Call the WMFE feedback line at 407-273-2300 and leave us a message. That's 407-273-2300. Or email us through our website, wmfe.org/thisweek.
The crew of the Space Shuttle Endeavour is on a home improvement mission this week. They're installing new equipment on the International Space Station. While here on Earth, NASA is confronting questions about the future of the Kennedy Space Center. WMFE's Pat Duggins reports.
Shortly after Endeavour illuminated the dark sky last week, NASA Administrator Michael Griffin shed some light on what's being done to try to save jobs at KSC. About 3,000 Brevard County workers may lose their jobs over 5 years because of the Space Shuttle's retirement in 2010. Its replacement, Orion, is set to launch in 2015. Griffin says this gap between the two programs can be minimized by accelerating production of Orion, possibly saving some jobs and reducing NASA's reliance on foreign space programs.
I asked for 2 studies, given some of the comments that were made during the presidential campaigns about trying to do what we could to minimize the gap and reduce the period where we would not be able to put our own astronauts into orbit.
Accelerated production of Orion would cost more money, an issue the Obama administration and congressional leaders will take up. Joining us now to talk all about this is Dale Ketchum of the Spaceport Research and Technology Institute. And Dr. Roger Handberg from the University of Central Florida is also here. He studies space policy. And thank you both very much for coming.
Glad to be here.
Leading up to the election, gentlemen, the Obama campaign talked about spending an additional $2 billion on NASA. Now that all is said and done, what is the likelihood that that's going to happen, considering the huge economic problems the nation's facing? Was there any indication that the plan included money targeted toward minimizing that gap between the end of Shuttle, the beginning of Orion? What do you think?
Well, I think the first thing is they're going to get the $2 billion. I mean, that's pretty much chump change today, given what the government's spending on economic issues. I think the bigger problem for NASA is they might have been a bigger priority if the economy had melted. Because what happens is now the demands on resources, and one option may be to cast the space program, as was during Apollo, as a jobs program in a different way, and maybe they can latch on to some of that money.
Well, the new director of the Kennedy Space Center, Bob Cabana, said, look, I'm coming into a job where basically 3,000 to 4,000 people are going to lose their positions, and there's really not a whole lot that I can do about it. What can be done to keep these people working?
Well, it remains to be seen what the NASA transition team recommends to the new president in terms of revisiting the architecture, going forward with Constellation, continuing flying the shuttle. Those are all decisions to be made by people at a higher pay grade. But we need to be able to respond to whatever those outcomes are. And I think for the most part, there's going to be a lot of job losses anyway. We can't replace with NASA work 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 jobs. But that does provide opportunity for additional investment. Senator Obama, during the campaign, spoke aggressively about making new investments in energy, renewed energy, renewable energies. A lot of that has an opportunity if they're going to make new investments in the country. Why not put some of them here and take advantage of the well-trained workforce?
Dr. Handberg, I was kind of wondering, the U.S. experienced a bit of tension with the former Soviet Union over the invasion of the state of Russia, state of Georgia, rather. Now, of course, the United States is also relying on the Russian Soyuz spacecraft to transport astronauts to and from the International Space Station. Does this kind of pose a problem for our domestic space program now that there's this 5-year gap that we're talking about?
Well, I mean, it obviously does. I mean, there's two things to think about. One, I think what the state of Florida hasn't done and Kennedy can't do because they're part of an agency is we need to cast space and push it towards some of the infrastructure money. Make it very clear we're going to build a space infrastructure. We don't talk about that. We talk about it a lot in the past, but we haven't in this opportunity. The economic turndown makes dollars available that wouldn't be available otherwise. I mean, that's what made Apollo happen, was because we were in an international crisis. The Soyuz transition, basically, is part of that problem. We failed to build a space infrastructure, so we end up with this gap. We have no way to cover it. We're not going to push the shuttle out. The NASA Inspector General said, no, you can't do it. It's too dangerous. Everyone agrees on that. But the problem is, if let's say we get this fix, then we build Ares and we fly that and all that, what happens when Ares goes bad? Because it will. I mean, we're not building an infrastructure or a capacity to push the space program into the future. We always look out for the fantasy of, oh, the private sector is going to do it. The private sector will do a lot of things, but human spaceflight, once you get beyond the obvious tourist part, really isn't part of their mission. They can't justify it in a cost-benefit ratio.
Well, speaking of the Soyuz, there was a rally out at Port Canaveral that actually, Dale, you put together, where there were a lot of people carrying signs that basically said, Soyuz with a big slash going through it. And the point of that, at least from your perspective, was to try to get the space program more into the national limelight, more onto the campaign, possibly even a platform plank. Grade your efforts. Did it work?
Yeah, I'd give us an A-. A number of us have been working very hard for a long time to raise the profile of space as an issue in the conversation of the presidential campaign. And I think by anybody's measure, we succeeded much more so. It was part of the campaign more so than it has probably ever been, certainly since Apollo. But the reason that that was on the campaign trail and the reason that Obama and McCain were addressing it was because of Florida. Because this is the only state that that particular issue moved the meter one way or another for the candidates. If we are creative and clever and lucky, we should be able to parlay that and leverage that into increasing the agency's top line budget going out for the next 4 years, because neither party is going to want to get the reputation for pushing down on NASA because it's so critical to the I-4 corridor, which gets you Florida's electoral college votes.
Now, Dr. Handberg, earlier you were talking about the job situation over at the Cape, and there's at least some talk of turning Kennedy Space Center into what is known as a federal city, sort of like what the Stennis Research Center did over in Mississippi. Very briefly, Dale, is it workable?
It's not the same as Stennis, but that approach, I think, is one we have to take because, as I said before, in order to try to mitigate the job losses, we're not going to be able to do that entirely with NASA money. So the opportunity to bring in Department of Energy, Commerce, FAA, all these other entities to help mitigate those job losses, we need to be focusing on what's the structure in which that would occur.
Our thanks to 90.7's Pat Duggins. To keep tabs on what's happening in the space industry, be sure to check out Pat's blog. It's called Pat's Launchpad, and you can find it at WMFE.org/Pat. That's it for today's program. I'm Janet Sawyer. Thank you for watching.